Brad and George have been a duo in the antiques business for over 20 years. They specialize in locating old properties and garages. One day they stumble upon an abandoned garage in a small town. When they open the door, they are left with their mouths open. There is an old car under a tarpaulin. When they remove the tarpaulin, they see that the car is still in perfect condition. Brad carefully opens the trunk. What he finds there, he would never have dared to dream of. In all their years of searching for saleable antiques, Brad and George had never seen anything like it. They stared silently at what was presented to them in the trunk of this old car. It was clear that this had only recently been put in by her. But why? And by whom? Questions that simply needed to be answered. They thought about calling the police, but since they were now the owners of the garage and the car inside, they would surely be in trouble when the truth about the place was known. And they didn't want to be the focus of a big investigation. But they also couldn't just ignore this finding. But before the two could make up their minds, they were stunned into silence when they suddenly heard a voice behind them ordering them to get away from the car. But what did Brad and George find in the trunk of the old car? Who was behind them? And why did the police have to intervene? Brad and George had no idea what he had gotten himself into when he decided to buy this very old house. He had made a living buying old properties cheaply, taking old antiques that had been forgotten, and then resorting to the house altogether, and then selling them at great profits. So they thought this would be a normal job for them. But it would turn out to be anything but. The man hadn't even seen this property before buying it, but the online description was enough to convince them to go for it. Apparently, the owner of the house had died almost 25 years ago, and no one had done anything with it in that time. It was located in a fairly remote location, so it wasn't a thorn in anyone's eye. The only reason it was now on the market was because the local government had heard about it and had claimed the house. Of course, they wanted to sell it right away for an easy profit. Because of the state it was in, there weren't many buyers, but that was precisely what Brad and George were interested in. They had gotten the house for much less than they had budgeted and were impatient to get there. They signed the papers at the administration office and immediately got into the car. It was at least an hour's drive, most of it through the nearby woods on the outskirts of a small town. They didn't want to waste time. The closer they got to the property, the clearer it became that it had been a long time since many people had passed through there. The road was in bad shape and covered with leaves, branches, and other things. It was not easy to cross it with his small car, but they succeeded, and the first sight of the house made it worth it. It looked like something out of a movie. The building looked horrible and was in the process of being reclaimed by natura. It was covered with limes, and even all the doors and windows were covered with them. Something that made Brad and George almost jump for joy, as that also meant that no one had been there for a long time. Had the garage door been opened? To the surprise of the two men, the garage door appeared to have been opened recently. All the folders had been torn off and were lying on the floor. This immediately raised an eyebrow. What was going on here? Could there be someone inside? They immediately made sure to be very quiet and began to slowly approach the garage. They listened attentively, but they heard nothing but the sounds of the forest. In addition to a key to the house, they had also obtained a key to the garage. But it turned out that they didn't need it, as the door was already open, which made them even more nervous. They hesitated before proceeding. They had no idea who or what could be in there, but they hadn't come that far to flee now either, and leaving the garage unattended wasn't clearly an option either. Brad counted to 3 and opened the garage door in one smooth motion. Light filled the dark room, and Bard and George quickly scanned everything. To their relief and surprise, They didn't see anything moving in the small garage, and they didn't see many places for anyone to hide. The only thing that was really there was a large piece of tarpaulin that covered what was clearly a car. Brad and George looked at each other. If this car had been here for 25 years, it could have become a collector's item. They both put their hands on the piece of trap and pulled him out of the car. But in addition to a very old car, they got the fright of their lives. Because when they removed the tarp, something jumped towards them, causing them both to scream and fall on their And as his assistant ran away, they could see that it was a gray cat. He quickly left through the cat-like entrance of the side door of the house. Brad and George crossed the threshold. The old door creaked ominously. The air inside was stale, impregnated with the smell of abandonment. Cobwebs adorned every corner, and a thin layer of dust covered the floor. When their eyes adjusted to the dim light, they could see the faded wallpaper peeling off the walls. It was like entering a forgotten world, a place frozen in time. Upon entering the hall, they found themselves surrounded by relics from a bygone era. A moth-eaten sofa was leaning against the wall, the fabric faded from years of sun exposure. On the mantelpiece, a collection of black and white photographs showed smiling faces from another era. Every step they took kicked up small clouds of dust, the only sign of movement in years. The study was a small, messy room, with the walls lined with bookshelves. The shelves were full of dusty tomes whose titles could barely be read. Among the books, stacks of letters tied with ribbons remained intact. Brad picked up a letter, the handwriting, elegant but faded, of everyday joys and sorrows. It was a tangible connection to the life that was once lived within these walls. In the kitchen, time seemed to have stopped. The antiquated appliances, testimony of another era, were still in place. George noticed a wall calendar, the pages of which were yellowed and curly. The date was marked on a day 25 years ago, as if someone had simply left, leaving their life behind in an instant. The dining room was expectant, as if frozen in the middle of the meal. A table set for dinner lay under a thick layer of dust, with the plates and cutlery still in place. The chairs were placed as if their occupants had just left. It was a silent painting, a moment captured and forgotten, waiting for someone to return to continue the story. Brad, piqued by curiosity, discovered a pile of cards in the study. All the envelopes were yellowed by the passage of time, and the ink on the pages faded little by little. The letters talked about daily routines, family news, and friendships from decades past. They described life as it was before, full of love, hope, and the inevitable passage of time. Brad felt a connection to those forgotten letters. In a corner of the room, George found an old diary, with the cover worn out but the padlock still firmly in place. He wondered about the secrets he kept, the personal thoughts and experiences of someone who had long since left. The diary was a small, intimate window into the past, but its contents remained a mystery, safeguarded by the padlock that refused to yield. As they continued exploring, they found a box full of old photographs. The faces that looked at them were unknown, but their expressions conveyed familiar emotions: joy, sadness, love. Each photo was a moment frozen in time, a snapshot of a life that was once intertwined with these same walls. Brad and George felt as if they were piecing together a forgotten history. In the last drawer of a dusty desk, they found an old map of the city. Interestingly, some places were marked with cryptic X's and notes. The map seemed to be more than just a guide. It gave glimpses of hidden stories, secret places, and even buried treasures from the city's past. It was a puzzle that invited us to continue exploring. The letters, the closed diary, the photographs, and the marked map formed a trail of clues. Each object revealed a rich and complex story about the house and its previous inhabitants. Brad and George felt like detectives, uncovering layers of stories that were woven into the very fabric of the house. The mystery was getting deeper and deeper, and urged them to continue investigating the past. Brad and George cautiously climbed the creaking stairs that led to the attic. They expected a cluttered space, but instead found a surprisingly well-organized area. The loft seemed almost untouched by time, which contrasted sharply with the rest of the house. The neatness was unnerving and hinted that someone had maintained this space long after the house was abandoned. In a corner of the attic, they discovered the cat and its litter comfortably curled up. The presence of the feline family indicated that the attic had been visited recently. It was a cozy place for the cat, with food and water. This discovery raised questions about who had been caring for the animals in such a forgotten place. Among the objects in the attic, they found a well-preserved military uniform and a collection of medals. These objects spoke of honor and service, suggesting that the former owner of the house had a significant military past. Brad and George felt respect and curiosity about the stories these objects could tell. The old suitcases, neatly stacked, contained more clues. Inside were postcards, travel souvenirs, and clothes from different parts of the world. These belongings described a life full of travel and adventure. The former owner had clearly been a person of the world, and these treasures were vestiges of his travels. Brad and George took a moment to reflect on their findings. The military memorabilia, the travel suitcases, and the tidy state of the attic were all part of a larger story. It seemed that the house had a storied past, full of triumphs and personal journeys. They were eager to discover more, to connect the dots of this intriguing historical puzzle. While immersed in their discoveries, Brad and George were startled to hear a noise coming from the floor below. It was a sharp, abrupt sound, breaking the silence that enveloped the house. They exchanged cautious glances, their curiosity now tinged with a hint of apprehension. The stillness of the house had been interrupted, and they knew that they had to investigate the source of the disturbance. Cautiously, they went downstairs and found the back door slightly ajar. It was clear that someone, or something, had recently entered the house. This unexpected sign of intrusion caused them a wave of unease. The isolation of the house, which had once been an exciting backdrop for his exploration, now seemed more ominous. Steeling themselves, Brad and George decided to face the mystery that awaited them. The garage, with its mysterious car, seemed like the next logical place to investigate. They thought whoever had entered the house might have something to do with the car. With a mixture of fear and determination, they headed towards the garage. As they approached the garage, the atmosphere became rarefied. The garage, once a place of intrigue, now seemed more foreboding. They moved slowly, each step fraught with uncertainty. The old car, hidden under the tarpaulin, peeked out in the gloom, like a silent sentinel that kept secrets yet to be revealed. Standing in front of the car, Brad and George felt a surge of adrenaline. It could be the moment when the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. With a mixture of excitement and nervousness, they reached for the trunk of the car, ready to reveal what it hid. The air was heavy with revelations. With a squeak, the trunk lid opened, revealing an empty space that seemed strangely clean compared to the rest of the car. Brad and George exchanged puzzled looks. The empty trunk was anticlimactic, but there was something about it that seemed deliberately misleading. It was as if the car was holding its breath, hiding a deeper secret beneath the surface. When they examined the trunk more closely, George noticed an irregularity in its lining. The bottom seemed slightly raised, hinting at the existence of a hidden compartment. The possibility of a hidden space rekindled his curiosity. It was clear that the car, abandoned for years, still had stories to tell, secrets carefully hidden from prying eyes. Just as they were about to delve into the secrets of the trunk, a sudden noise outside the garage caught their attention. The crunch of the gravel indicated that someone was approaching. Their hearts raced as they realized they were no longer alone. The mystery of the car was momentarily relegated by the immediate concern of this unexpected intrusion. The tension in the air was palpable as a shadowy figure entered the garage. The man was armed. His intentions were not clear, but his attitude was threatening. Brad and George, unprepared, could only watch as it approached. The sense of adventure that had fueled their exploration now turned into fear for their safety. Before they could react, the stranger had tied their hands with quick, experienced movements. Brad and George found themselves helplessly tied up, the mystery of the car and the house overshadowed by their immediate situation. The man left without a word, leaving them alone in the dimly lit garage, surrounded by more questions than answers. The gunman, staring at the garage, asserted his dominance over Brad and George. The men could only watch, with their hearts pounding, as he walked on the ground. The danger of his situation became more and more real, the fear tangible in the gloom of the garage. Bound and immobilized, Brad and George struggled to understand their situation. Questions crowded in their minds. Who was this man? What did he want? The uncertainty of their fate hung over them, overshadowing their former excitement. The excitement of discovery had turned into a desperate hope of safety. His phones, his only avenue of communication with the outside world, lay frustratingly out of reach on a nearby workbench. The devices seemed to mock his helplessness, so close but unreachable. Brad pushed against his bonds and realized the futility of his situation. His isolation in the garage became more pronounced, the silence interrupted by his heavy breathing. In the midst of his desperation, the cat, silent until now, re-entered the garage. He seemed oblivious to the tension, but he was struck by the brightness of the phones. Curious and playful, the cat fumbled with the devices, unaware of their potential to alter the terrible circumstances of the garage. To his surprise, the cat's playful slaps on the phone caused the phone to stagger on the edge of the workbench. With one last push, the phone fell to the ground and was within Brad's reach. The cat, who had inadvertently become her unlikely savior, continued to prowl around the garage, unaware of his crucial role in her possible rescue. With a mixture of relief and urgency, Brad managed to stretch his fingers toward the phone. His movements were clumsy, but he managed to dial for help. The sound of the phone being connected instilled a wave of hope in him. When he spoke to the operator, his voice was a mixture of fear and determination. Help was on the way, and his plight had a chance to be resolved. In a matter of minutes, the sound of sirens pierced the tranquility of the surroundings. Law enforcement quickly arrived at the scene, and their presence conveyed a sense of authority and security. Brad and George were relieved when the police entered the garage. The sense of isolation and danger began to dissipate with the authoritarian presence of the officers. Once released, Brad and George told the attentive agents about their ordeal. They explained the mysterious circumstances of its discovery and the sudden appearance of the armed intruder. His story, full of twists and unexpected discoveries, was met with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. The police took note, interested in the strange series of events. The agents began to piece together the puzzle of the strange events that occurred in the house and garage. They examined the car and the surrounding area for clues. The research began to develop, and each piece of evidence added to the picture that was emerging. Brad and George watched, waiting for the police to uncover the truth behind the day's harrowing experiences. With the intervention of the police, the chaos of the day was once again filled with order. Brad and George, no longer bound and helpless, felt a growing hope. The ordeal was far from over, but with the authorities in charge, the possibility of understanding what had happened and why seemed to be within reach. The garage, once a place of fear, now held the promise of answers. The policemen, with methodical precision, turned their attention to the car in the garage. Brad and George watched as they examined the vehicle, with a special interest in the trunk. The discovery of the false bottom had raised suspicions, and now, with professional hands at work, the car was ready to reveal its secrets. With tools in hand, one of the agents expertly accessed the false bottom of the trunk. The hidden compartment, a cleverly camouflaged section of the car, was slowly revealed. Brad and George held their breath, the palpable tension as the agent opened the hidden space, ready to unveil what had remained hidden for so long. The compartment opened to reveal piles of cash, tightly tied up and filling the trunk. The sight of the money, clearly a considerable amount, left everyone shocked. The discovery of this hidden cache of stolen money turned the mystery of the old car and garage into a criminal investigation, adding a new layer of complexity to the case. Police quickly linked the discovery of the money to a series of recent robberies in the area. The stolen money matched the reported amounts, and the officers realized they had found crucial evidence. Brad and George saw how the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, and the story of the mysterious garage and its contents became clearer. Upon discovering the stolen money, the police quickly formulated a plan to catch the perpetrator. They decided to use the garage and the car as bait, hoping that the thief would come back for the money. Brad and George, still shocked by the day's events, were invited to participate in the trap, as the resolution of their affair depended on the capture of the criminal. Under the direction of the cop, Brad and George were tied up once again, simulating their previous situation. The garage was prepared to look like the same, with the stolen money back in its hidden compartment. They played their roles, feigning impotence, while the trap was being set. The stage was set, and the expectation of the intruder's return hung in the air. Tied up and waiting, Brad and George felt that every minute was getting on endlessly. Her anxiety was palpable, a mixture of fear and expectation. The plan was risky, and they couldn't help but worry about the outcome. Every noise and every shadow seemed to indicate the return of the intruder, keeping them on their toes. Unseen by any casual observer, the police officers were strategically placed around the property, their eyes fixed on the garage. They communicated in hushed tones, and their presence was a silent promise of protection and action. Ready to intervene at any moment, they were the invisible guardians of this high-risk operation. As the hours passed, the tension in the garage increased. Brad and George, in their simulated state of captivity, exchanged worried glances. The stillness of the atmosphere contrasted with the agitation of emotions they experienced. The uncertainty of the situation weighed on them, the outcome of the night's events still hanging by a thread. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching. The intruder, unaware of the trap that had been set for him, entered the garage. As he made his way towards the car, the police sprang into action and stopped him quickly and effectively. The trap had worked, the criminal had been captured, and Brad and George's ordeal was finally over. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The intruder, surprised by the quick police action, was quickly arrested. Handcuffed and escorted out of the garage, his surprise was evident. Brad and George watched as the man who had caused them so much fear and uncertainty was finally in police custody. The relief of the moment was palpable, a tangible end to the threat that had loomed over them. After the arrest, the police reconstructed the whole story. The money stolen in the trunk was linked to a series of recent robberies. The intruder had been using the abandoned house as a hideout and the garage car as a secret stash. Brad and George listened in fascination as the layers of mystery they had stumbled upon were unraveled. The agents also explained the unexpected role of the cat. It turned out that the feline had belonged to a neighbor and had found refuge in the abandoned house. The intruder had grown fond of the cat and had taken care of it while using the house as a hiding place. This small detail added a human dimension to the cold narrative of crime and deception. The offender was accused and tried for his actions. The evidence was overwhelming, and justice was done quickly. Brad and George were praised for their bravery and cooperation. As they watched the court process unfold, they were comforted to learn that their unexpected affair had contributed to the resolution of an important criminal case. With the case closed, Brad and George were left outside the no longer so mysterious house. They reflected on their incredible journey, from curious explorers to key figures in unraveling a criminal plot. As they prepared to leave, their thoughts turned to the future, to new projects and adventures. This experience had been unexpected, but it had also brought them closer and prepared them for what lay ahead.